Hi. I'm glad you're okay. You know, the ups and downs, that'll happen sometimes in the recovery process. But also, it could be that there's some like mental patterns that are pulling you back down, because like there's the up and down of like the processing and the releasing of emotions, right? And then there's also the roller coaster ride where you're still on it and you're just going up and down because you're still thinking about it a lot, or you know what I mean, like you're still in it in some way, or in contact, like in your case you're not, but unless you're just feeling like you're releasing the emotions, because that's another part of it, is like I was talking about earlier, stuff will just come up, usually anger first, and then beneath the anger are the deeper emotions, the sadness and the grief and the fear and just just like the despair of it all, right? All that's underneath there. If those things are coming up, allow them to come and flow through you. Allow your emotions just to flow through you, because if you don't, then they're stuck. Or if you reinforce them with like a victim story and it just stays in there, right? Then it stays stuck with you. So you want to give that feeling, give those feelings space to flow, to move. Yeah, a lot of mixed emotions. That's very much a part of the recovery process, where you're just processing things, and it could take a while. Like it could be that all that emotion was trapped for so long, and then now you're just like, you have the space and the time to process it. So it's coming out and you're like, man, where'd that come from? Like I didn't even realize, but it was just buried for so long. I mean, it could be stuff coming from childhood too. It's triggering the things from the childhood. And so that stuff could be coming up. It could be mixed emotions. Sometimes people describe like missing the person or feeling some kind of like tenderness towards them and or loving them or something like that. And then on the other hand, like feeling the anger and the despair and the sadness and the grief, and then like going back and forth and all of that. And, it's like I said earlier, it's just really important to really feel that and allow yourself to feel it, because that's part of the healing process. Like it can't be healed when it's just buried in the subconscious and in the body. So that it's coming out, this is good, and it's hard because sometimes we want to beat up on ourselves. Like, why am I still mad about that? Like, why am I still upset about that? I'm still letting him get to me, and, that kind of stuff. But trust that like, your body, your mind has a system and it's releasing things, through that process. And when you're feeling it, it's important to feel it, to allow that, to stop yourself from trying to sabotage it. If you're doing that, if you're like, oh, why am I feeling like this or that, or what's wrong with me? You just be like, okay, it's okay that I'm angry. It's okay that I'm sad. It's okay that I'm whatever you feel. And maybe you see memories associated with it or something of that nature. Maybe you see flashback of even childhood superimposing on your last relationship, and then some new pattern comes together. You can see some bigger picture in things, which is usually what happens. All those feelings come up and we process that and we get some kind of new understanding. And then it's like, okay, now we can release that because we get it. Like we get the message, because the feeling is a message. It's a message from the intuition. It's the connection between the body and the mind. So it's like trying to convey something that we're not seeing. So then the feeling comes and it's like really strong in trying to convey something, and so allow that to come up, allow it to happen, allow yourself to feel it, to see it, to experience it, so it can move through you, so you don't have to hold on to it. I've had to visualize cutting the cord a few times. Okay, good. So it could be that not all the cords were cut. Could be that you're reconnecting the cords in some of your mental habits, thinking about him. Could be that he's trying to reconnect to you. Either way, just keep cutting those cords as you feel them, reconnected, as you keep moving through the process of releasing your feelings and emotions. You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to read one email question while I'm waiting for you guys to write more in the chat here. Okay, so this person said, I just saw your piercing the denial video. I'm so glad you posted it. this is where I'm at right now, but for some reason, I'm feeling so much fear. Is that normal? For example, it's been a while since I have cut my brother from his trauma bond activities toward me, love bombing, etc. But I just stopped my mother also from doing the same, and I am overwhelmed with a lot of fear. It's like my instincts I have lost for the past few years are kicking into gear. I'm not sure why it's flowing from inside me. I'm also seeing a lot of flashbacks from long lost days when they used to do this, including my father, and I used to be in denial. But now I am so sure and clear about what happened and that there was no love in any of it. So, the person's main question here is, they're talking about, they're in that thing, I was talking about that in the video, piercing the denial, where you're going back and forth. So like, it's an abusive situation, this isn't healthy, you don't want this, but then that other part of you just like gets sucked back in it. And like, it's almost like consciously you can't get a grip on it. So she's saying, I think it's a she, or maybe it was a he, feeling so much fear. Is that normal? Yeah, it's very normal. And, the person talked about right after that about, setting those new boundaries with their brother so that the trauma bond stuff doesn't continue. That's when I will feel the most amount of like terror is right when I set that boundary. And what I noticed was like, a month ago or something, I was waiting for my mom to call me back. Something was going on with my dad. And when she didn't call me back right away, I this whole like panic fear thing took over. And I was like, oh my God, that's what I felt all my life. Like every time I was expecting that I was going to get in trouble for something, like I stood up for myself, or I took some action that wasn't okay with her, or I did something that I was going to get in trouble, my whole body would go into like this panic, anxiety, just sheer terror feeling. And what I realize nowadays is it's about the boundaries and that sort of thing. And so like, if I don't hear back, it was just reminding me of in the childhood when there was like an impending punishment coming. Like I knew I was getting in trouble. Either I set a boundary and I stood up, or I did something and I broke a boundary, a rule. And I knew trouble was coming, punishment was coming. So it's very normal when you're setting a new boundary with a toxic person where you've had especially all this history to feel like this sudden terror. As soon as you set the boundary, it's like, oh, right? Because like you're afraid of what's coming. You're afraid of the punishment. You're afraid for, God, you just stood up, right? For like maybe the first time ever, or you just stood up, and you rarely do that because you know what happens when you stand up and you're expecting that. And maybe not the same thing is going to happen, but maybe it's just like the old training in your nervous system. So yeah, it is normal to feel fear as you're getting out of that denial, because when you were in the denial, you didn't feel that fear so much. There might've been moments when you went into fear when like things were really bad, or when things were like really, really good. And then you were like expecting it to come, like, cause it was too good. It was too good to be true for too long. The cycle, it's coming. So you go into that fear, dread, panic, terror state. And the same thing will happen, when you set the new boundaries, is because you're expecting the backlash from it. But don't let the fear get you. And so the way that I deal with fear is like, I make a plan and then I take action. Like you have to take action to show yourself that there is nothing to fear there. And so usually I make a plan first. Usually I don't just jump and take action. Sometimes certain situations like emergencies or whatnot, like you'll have to do something like that. But if you can plan something, right? Plan, the next encounter. Like maybe this person's talking about the brother. Maybe they still have to be in contact for some reason. So planning the next meeting when you're going to run into your brother, or when you're going to go back to work and face the narc at work, or however the situation is, maybe if you're still in the relationship and you're trying to get out, like you're in that in-between stage of the denial where but then the denial keeps sucking you back in. You're feeling that terror, that fear, because you're setting the new boundaries and realizing things, but also because like you're also realizing that it's like something is going to have to happen. Like things are changing now. Like your awareness is already changing the situation. There's no going back to sleep for good, because that awareness is going to keep popping up. There'll be times when you go back under until you finally get it and have that breakthrough, right? But when you're still in that denial, there'll be times when you go back under again, but you still know, like at some degree, you already still know And so, you know, things are going to have to change. You know, things aren't going to keep going the way they are, the way they were. And that's also probably part of the fear of change, the fear of what's going to happen. What are you going to do? What is he or she going to do? What's the future hold? All of that, you know. So I would say, yes, fear is totally normal in all of those situations. And, you know, the best way to deal with it is just to take the action, make the plan, take the action, and just keep confronting that fear. So if you have to keep seeing this narcissist, you know, in your life, then make a plan for what you're going to do and how you're going to show up and be present in the moment when you're with them, and how you're not going to react to what they're doing, and how you're going to use diffusing language, you know, when they're trying to force you to agree with them or whatever, like, well, that's your opinion, so-and-so, and you're entitled to your opinion, and I disagree, or that's interesting, you know, that sort of thing, where you're just kind of like deflecting all of that stuff and not getting engaged with it. So you're making a plan, and then when you get into the situation, you're taking the new action, you're withholding the boundary, you're doing the gray rock communication, where you're not really having any kind of emotional connection, you're just keeping it on the surface, you're not letting them disturb you or upset you or force you to take a strong opinion that then they can like take the opposite and give you a hard time. So to deal with that fear, make the plan, take the action, and keep doing that consistently. And eventually you won't have that fear so much anymore. Like it might still come up sometimes, but not nearly like it did before, because it's training. Like the fear was trained into you, you know, from the past, from, you know, a lifetime of that, growing up in that family. And so now you're retraining that fear out of your nervous system by taking new action, because as you're taking new action, you're seeing different results. So your subconscious is like, oh, okay. And it starts to believe it. It starts to get on board. It starts to recognize that things are different. Things are changing. You're taking action. It's not the same story as before. So that now there's nothing more to grasp onto with the fear. Okay, got some messages here. Someone says, I was trying to find the recording from 8-8 session number 2, but couldn't find it. 8-8 was 2 weeks ago. The sauna session? Is that what you're talking about? Because it would be on there. It would be on my channel. Yeah, the sauna session, the Q&A, it should be on there. It should be on my channel. 8-8. Yeah, we had 2 sessions that day. 2 weeks ago. Yeah, we definitely had 2 sessions that day. It should still be up there. Check again. Hopefully it's up there. Just got my second text after 11 weeks asking if he could text or call sometime. Okay, so this is a hoovering then. My friend was reminding me I should block the text. Yes, your friend is giving you good advice. All the reading and videos have me clear not to respond to the text, but I still want to know if he texts or what he says. In the past, I would have thought this meant he cared or he misses me, but I've read it just means he needs supply. Correct. And I am seeing I still want some acknowledgement, some attention. Thank you so much for all your support and information. So yeah, good job. You're recognizing the situation exactly as it is. And so many people are in this situation and tell me, well, no, I didn't block them. I mean, I'm not answering, but you know, I really want to know, like, you know, are they going to reach out and what are they going to say? And it's just so dangerous. And that's the advice that I want to give you is it is so dangerous, you know, to get yourself into that situation, because there's the temptation of like, you waited and waited and waited so long and nothing came. And then all of a sudden the text came and you're responding before you know it. And you're like, fuck, I just sent send. Like I was not going to do that. And I did it and I fell for it. Whether you fell for like the positive, you know, hoovering, I miss you, I love you, nothing's the same without you, or the negative when they're like, I can't believe you, blah, 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 whatever, whatever. Either way, it's not going to go well for you. And either way, when you read that text, you'll see. Because if you don't take the advice of your friend, and if you don't take my advice, which is the same as your friend, to block all that, and if you allow that text to come through, you will see. As soon as you read it, pay attention to your body, because your whole body just activated that trauma response. Take note of it. You'll see it. Those of you who were at the end of your relationship, you know, maybe you noticed this too, or in hoovering, how your body will respond like that. Maybe even like you have a particular text message, like on most smartphones, you can choose a certain tone or text sound for each person. And what you'll notice is that that sound, just hearing that sound of his text or her text, will trigger the whole trauma bond, PTSD, anxiety, panic, attack response. Like it's so immediate. It's so instantaneously immediate. And maybe you're waiting for that proof, but what I can tell you is that every time you do that, you're still traumatizing yourself. You're traumatizing your brain. You're causing, 4 to 6 hours of adrenaline release in your body. You're like zzz, for like the next 4 to 6 hours. And then it could be days or weeks of you just can't stop thinking about him or her after you read that text, even if you didn't respond. It's really, really dangerous. It's a dangerous mind game that you're playing with yourself, so I would be really cautious with that. I think ideally is just to block that so it doesn't come through. If you don't take that advice, which is fine, feel free to do whatever you like. Just know and expect what's going to happen, which is that trauma response, the anxiety, the fear, and knowing that you better clear your schedule for the next several days, because that's going to be all in your mind. Like it's going to be eating you alive. You're going to go back to the obsession patterns and all of that. Like it will happen. It's just, it sounds so easy. I know it sounds so easy to think, oh, no problem. He or she can just text or call or email or whatever, and it's not going to do anything. It's nothing. I don't care anymore. I just want to know what they have to say, but nothing's going to happen. It's not going to do anything. And you would be surprised how much you could still do. I mean, years and years down the road, significantly less. Like after the 2-year mark or so, especially into like 5 years, then it's almost like you're not really going to have that response as much. The physiological response calms down. The nervous system doesn't perceive that as such a threat. Your body still remembers things, but it's not that full on, all hands on deck, systems alert kind of thing, which is the PTSD hypervigilance response, the anxiety, the panic attacks, the dread, all that. So be really cautious with that. Also, I see, honey, someone just posted, and thank you to that person, the 2 links to the sauna Q&As from that day. Another message. I got an extremely long email from my ex last Tuesday. He talked about how he was still so in love with me and wanted to marry me without a doubt and would do whatever it takes to make it work with me. The email broke me down. It made me feel awful because I have been ignoring him for months, aka no contact. Well, something happened a few days ago. I had a breakdown. I drove to our old house. He wasn't home. This is where I am kind of embarrassed of what I did, but I am so glad I did. I went into the house to grab some old items of mine. Also, during this time, wanted to see if he was being truthful to me and seriously trying to change, and if he was really as lonely as he said. Here's what I found. My closet had a new woman clothes in it, and my old drawer had condoms in it. We didn't use condoms. I told my narc he was full of shit and to never contact me again. I know I shouldn't have entered the house, but I finally found what he had been hiding from me for years. I now know all I need, and I never want to get back with him, but I don't know why. I just needed solid proof that he was seriously playing me. Deep down, I did want him to be a narc, but now I know that no man that seriously loves me as much as he claims would already have a new woman warming his bed. He said to me, I don't even like her, I'm just lonely. I told him to go to hell and stop contacting me. I honestly had been doing fine until he sent me that long email. I blocked him in every way possible. This has been the biggest eye-opener for me. Wow, okay. So I'm glad that you have fully blocked him now, and now you're ready to move on. You got the proof you needed. So many times I've heard a very similar thing, like, I'm embarrassed for what I'm about to say. I've heard myself admitting that. I'm embarrassed for what I'm about to say, but I went ahead and played the detective and did something I shouldn't have, but found the answer that I needed desperately to move on, to know the truth. And you got your answer now, right? So, Now, you know, everything happened. It already happened, is in the past. There's no point, you know, in blaming yourself for anything that happened. Now you get it fully, hopefully, that this guy's not changing. He's going to be the same person always. That's just who he is. And now it's so clear, like, you know, without a shadow of doubt what he's doing, you know. So at least you know the truth coming out of that. Sometimes we got to go back for those lessons. Like, I did that several times where I had to know. I had to know. It's like there's like this part of you that can't let go of the obsession until you just see the proof in some way. You don't care how ugly it is or how awful it is. Like, you're just like, oh, thank God I finally saw it, you know? So, you know, at least you got that out of there. Now, you know, now you're like totally, totally, hopefully no contact moving forward, you know, because you got your answer. Now there's nothing left unresolved. You totally get it. Now you can go ahead and start processing the emotions, because I could probably guarantee that that whole, you know, the email, the going there, the finding the discovery and all that, and any contact you had, you know, after that, all of that has re-triggered a lot of things. So now all this emotion is coming up, which is good because it's coming up and out. You know, maybe that's what you needed to do to get it unlodged and unstuck and out. And so now, you know, processing the emotion, that's going to be the great step for you to take. Processing the feelings, allowing yourself to feel what you feel, you know, and then allowing it to move through you so that it doesn't keep getting stuck back in the body. It just hurts like hell. Wound reopened. But yes, finally, I know. Yeah, the wound got reopened for sure, you know, but sometimes, you know, it doesn't heal right. Right. And so we got to like rip it back open, get out all the disgusting stuff in that wound, you know, because it was just kind of like rotting in there and like not really healing, and probably going to heal with like a really bad scar that maybe we needed to treat in the future. Right. Sometimes we just got to get in there and clean that wound out all over again. It's like reopening the wound, but like really, really, really clean it out this time, you know, and then everything is raw again. All the feelings are raw. All this stuff is coming up again, and allow that to come up, allow it to pass through you, allow yourself to truly experience what you're feeling, you know, and then ask yourself too, like, where have I felt this before? You know, was this the first time I felt this? Probably not. You know, so, okay, so where have I felt this before? And when else have I felt this before? And watch the progression. And then, like, you know, you can do this like in a hypnosis session with someone. You could just do this for yourself through a guided visualization where you're asking yourself these questions, and then ask yourself, when was the first time I felt this way before? And then see what memory comes. And that's probably your inner child wound right there. When was the first time I felt this? You know, and then watch how that played out and watch how similar that was. You know, and that's when you're kind of like, okay, you know, I get it now. Like, thanks for the lesson. I get it. You stirred that emotion so I could recognize that I still had a wound there that I hadn't dealt with from the past, you know, probably from childhood. And so that was the gift there. And then you can process that deeper and deeper, you know, through your childhood wound. Yes, honestly, I am so happy I saw what I did, because my gut told me it the whole time. The spooky part is that I had a dream of the same thing happening 2 weeks ago. I never thought dreams were accurate, but this was dead on. Wow, that's really wild. You know, so some dreams, what they're discovering now is there's like two kinds of dreams. One is an REM state and one is in a different state. And there's one kind of dreaming, which is like processing of the emotional past, like that day, or, you know, something triggering coming up from before. It's like clearing the cache, you know, in your computer. And so like things will come up. And so, you know, your subconscious is going through imagery and feelings and things, and you're processing things so you can wake up with a clean emotional slate the next morning, you know. And then there's some dreams which are like prophetic dreams. Those when you're like in the hyper consciousness state, where usually those are more like gamma waves, brain waves, which are very, very high frequency. And that's when you're tapping into the super consciousness and everything else. And that's when you can have, you know, like clear visions of things that are going to happen. And maybe you'll notice this, you know, more during periods of time. I notice this more during periods of time when I'm in a bad situation. I rarely have these like premonitory dreams when everything is good. Usually it's when I'm in a bad situation, and then I'll have these dreams and like the next day, like that exact thing happens or something so, so similar. or, you know, it's like they're trying to tell me something, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, I give dreams quite a bit of weight. You know, in your recovery journals and your healing journals, I would write down dreams that you're having, because you can get a lot of insight from them. I mean, there's like whole fields of psychotherapy that specifically focus on dreams, like Jungian dream analysis. You can find therapists who do that. You can find other holistic people who interpret dreams. I have one friend who does this. I mean, she has a gift for this. Like, I would call her, be like, girl, I just had this weird dream. Let me tell you about this. And then she would like help me gain insights from that, like things I just hadn't seen or put together. You can also look online. You can do like a generalized search for certain themes, or look on dreammoods.com. I find them to be pretty accurate with the symbolism and also the feeling, you know, because dreams have symbols, and then most predominantly is the feeling. And especially when that feeling lingers, like the dream hangover, and like into your day, you just keep feeling that feeling you felt in your dream. There's something there. There's something important to notice in that feeling. But yeah, I'm glad you figured it out. You know, sometimes it's like you said, you know, your gut told you the whole time, but you just didn't have proof. And it's so hard. So I was telling that person earlier in the session today, when you don't have proof, like, you know it, but it's like you're just dying to see it written, you know, written right there so clearly that you can't deny it. And even then, sometimes we want to deny it, right? But sometimes it just gets to that point where we go and we investigate and we do something that is crossing our own boundaries and our own integrity that we wouldn't normally do. But it got to that point. You know, I can't tell you how many times I hear this from clients. They're like, what I'm about to tell you, I know it's really bad and I'm really embarrassed, but I swear it just got to that point. And like, that's when you know you're in a bad situation. Like, if you're ever in that situation again, where you're feeling like you have to be the detective, you're in the relationship, right? And you're feeling like you just got to go investigate something, that already, that's your flag right there, the red flag. The fact that you even think you have to go investigate that is a sign something's not right. Because if everything was okay, you wouldn't be having those feelings, you know? So take that as, you know, an understanding moving forward too. Yes. Like you said, after this, I will never doubt my gut again. Amen. Listen to that intuition. Just trust it. Even if you don't have proof, you've got to listen to that first. You know, maybe you'll get proof down the road. Maybe you never do. You know, this other woman adds in here, I finally found the proof of his cheating in porn. And you were lucky that you found it. Sometimes people just don't find it. And they hold on because they don't see it, you know, or they're dreaming and hoping that that's not it, that it's not what they're feeling and thinking and imagining is happening. You know, and sometimes it's just, even though it's horrifying, it's just so relieving to finally see the truth. Yeah, it's crazy how we somehow know, our guts just know what's really going on, even if we're not there for it. Yeah. Yeah, your body doesn't lie. Like, your body knows the truth. Your body remembers things, like cellular memory. And your body, like, even in the moment, that's why, like, you know, when I was telling people earlier about going back into the dating world, listen to your feeling, listen to your body. Like, what are you feeling? Where in your body is it trying to communicate something to you? Pay attention to the language of your body, because it is revealing to you your truth. You want to listen to that. And your truth is different than other people's truth, and that's okay. You know, but what's also important is that you recognize that your truth is your truth, and you don't want to accept someone else's version of reality when it's going against your own truth. Whether or not they're a good person, they might be, but it just might be that you have a really different truth and reality, and you've got to listen to that. Okay, to the person from earlier who was waiting for the text message. Great advice. Thanks, Meredith. Yes, I keep reading the two sentences over and over and got a little high, then sad. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it can take you under, you know, in like this, it's like the tidal wave that you go out into the ocean a little bit, and it doesn't look that bad from this, you know, the surface when you're on the beach. And so you start stepping out, and like, before you even, like, it's like suddenly so clear, you're in over your head, and the wave catches you in the undertow and you're out. Like, it happens to good swimmers all the time. It's the same phenomenon happening in your subconscious. Like, you think you can handle it and you're looking at it consciously and you're assessing the situation, right? but then you're in it and so it's so fast the way it happens. And it's like, you have no control of it, over the power of that emotion. Water is emotion. It's very similar, the symbolism. Okay. The person with the ex-partner who was into porn and whatnot, I went looking, and when I confronted him, he treated me like shit, as if I had done something bad. No apology or remorse. They are never accountable. And that's the tricky thing about, when you invade their privacy to go look for something, it's like, you're not that kind of person, right? You wouldn't normally do that sort of thing. It got to that point where like you knew something was really wrong. They were lying and hiding from you. So you took it upon yourself to go find out, and then they turned it back on you. And instead of admitting what they did wrong or having any sort of accountability or apology for what they did wrong, they just turned it around on you. I can't believe you did that to me. Which is everything. It's the whole nature of that kind of abuse. It's crazy making. It'll drive you crazy. And because your conscience works, you're going to start to feel guilty about that, because you did something that is not in integrity with who you are. But that it came to that point. It was circumstances required that. You had to find out so you could know, so you could let it go. But they won't let you get over that. They're always going to hold that over you and try to make you out to be the bad person. And yeah, as soon as that happens, it's a really bad situation. You got what you needed. You got the answer. You got the proof. That's when you got to walk away. When you guys get to that point, so many people talk about this exact phenomenon. Like I've heard this. It is almost the exact same language every time, because we all have that sense of conscience, which it feels guilty. We know when we go and investigate that it's wrong to be in someone's personal property like that. But we also know that like they're hiding something, they're lying about something. We had to go see what it was. Someone says, I guess at this point, okay, the person from the house incident, I guess at this point, I am just amazed at how he can love someone so deeply as he claims and still be with someone else. Someone told me that's just how guys are, but I think it's just a narc thing. Yeah, it's not a guy thing. It's a narc thing. That's just how guys are is some, it's either some narcissistic guy justifying his behavior, just like the narcissistic parent saying, all families are dysfunctional, which they are to a certain degree. And there's some truth in that, but the reality is that your family situation was severe. That was not typical, normal little dysfunction of human beings who aren't perfect and who make mistakes. It was a serious issue. Yeah, it's not all guys. There are plenty of men who are capable of monogamy, like plenty of men who are capable of monogamy. It's not like it's hardwired into the males of the species to do that. Definitely not. And there's plenty of women who do that, narcissistic women, sociopathic women, borderline women. They could easily be doing that. Easily. I hear from guys, who talk about this woman was already in with someone else or multiple people, which they're pretty sure about, but then they confirmed later, and or they break up and that person is like, that woman is immediately with somebody else and they're like totally with somebody else. And you're like, how did you go from that to that so fast? Because they already lined it up. It was already there. It wasn't even brand new. And they have no problems about that. No qualms about that. That's a narc thing. Yeah, for sure. Of course, there are the brands of narcs who aren't into the sex at all, and that's another situation. But in the situation where they're using sex as a tool, as a form of control and power, then yeah, that's what they're doing, and the fact that like they have to have supply, like they don't survive without that supply. The parasite doesn't survive without the host. So yeah, that's where he was at. Okay, so the person from before was saying, I guess that's true. I started reading old emails from him the next day, which was a surprise. Yeah, so you already felt that pull back. So you knew that wasn't, you were like, where's this coming from, right? I thought I was over this and here. And then before you know it, you're reading the emails and like hours went by and you're like, oh my God, what am I doing, right? Yeah, that's part of that unconscious thing where the tidal wave, comes and washes over you and pulls you out to sea before you even realize it. Someone writes privately, it's been 2 months since I last saw my ex-narc, and 1 month since I texted him. He's texted me once a week for the last month, but I haven't responded. Not sure why he keeps contacting me, but I'm also not sure why I can't let him go completely and go full no contact. I'm struggling to understand to let go. I want to go full no contact, but just not ready to make that total break. I was so dependent on him emotionally, and he was an everyday part of my life. I'm still seeking some validation that I meant something to him. I guess I don't want to believe the truth, that I was an object and meant no more to him than a stranger. He was a player and used me, so it makes no sense that I'd miss him, but there's a void. I know what I need to do, but why is it so hard for me to do it? What do I think will happen if I continue to leave myself open to receiving messages? I know I deserve better than the narc and am worth more. What do I need to convince myself so I can move on? So what do you think will likely happen, if you wait for him to receive that message? Probably what you're saying is that you're still seeking validation and hoping that you meant something to him, right? Maybe you're just waiting for that text to come in and say, I love you so much and I miss you and you were the best thing that ever happened in my life and I wasn't the man that I could have been and I could be so much better and blah, blah, blah. And I've heard that exact thing on a Hoover, and that was just a dirty trick. It just pulled me right back. He didn't mean a word of it, not a word. So that's the danger. So recognize that you're setting yourself up for danger by hoping and waiting for that. Because what if he gives you what you think you want? And he says that thing that you think you want to hear. And then you're right back in it. And it was just a dirty trick to get you right back, but he doesn't mean any of it. He just said what he knew you wanted to hear. So that's the danger. Recognize that by expecting and hoping for that validation from him, you're putting yourself in a very dangerous position of getting sucked back in. That void inside is not him missing. That void inside is the rawness of that wound that you have had long before him. You're just much more aware of that right now because he just came into that void, filled it, and then left it. So now you're like, fuck, I have this void here, right? Yeah, but that void was there long before him. And that's the thing. And he's not going to fix that. You could get back in with him and he will be a temporary distraction for how you really feel inside that emptiness and void inside yourself. And that's where I would recommend working instead. Instead of re-traumatizing yourself with him or someone like him, I would go to that inner wound and I would find out, what is that? And can you name that? Is it loneliness? Is it abandonment, rejection? What is that void? That void came from childhood. Something in childhood made you feel that void. Whatever that thing is, whether, for me, it was loneliness. It might be for you, it might be something a little different. It might be more in the lines of like rejection. I wasn't good enough. No one loved me. For me, it was no one was there. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted me. It was like the unwanted pregnancy, which, by the way, these inner child wounds, like psychology goes back to childhood, right? And maybe even a little bit, certain psychological schools of thought will look into like conception to birth time, but mostly they focus on birth and beyond, the postnatal psychology. But there is a lot to the prenatal and perinatal psychology, which is more the shamanic sorts of perspectives. And then, of course, you could look into past lives or transpersonal experiences and these wounds coming from bigger places too. But I don't want to go too deep into that, but what I want to say is that these wounds can also be started to form while you're in gestation. Like maybe your mom didn't want to get pregnant. Like she never wanted to have kids, or she definitely didn't want to have that kid right then and there. But for whatever reason she did, and so she's programmed into you, I don't want you. You shouldn't be here. I don't want this pregnancy. And so that gets imprinted into you at a cellular level, even when you're like a single celled organism and you're just building, who you are. It's like a program that gets in there. And so like if you have that wound of loneliness, it could be coming from something like that. Like my mom flat out said she never wanted to have kids. And It's almost like she says it with disdain and scorn. And I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense then. No wonder I felt unwanted. No wonder, like, that was my life story. She never told me I didn't want you and I didn't want to have you, but that was the programming. And that can happen even when people aren't narcissists. Like, that can just happen to a terrified woman who it's like not the time to get pregnant. Maybe she's young, maybe it's a life situation, maybe the guy was wrong, and she's just terrified of being pregnant. And for whatever reason, like, she doesn't terminate the pregnancy, she carries it and has the baby. That baby has been imprinted with that. And maybe that mother is loving and generally wants to love that child and just doesn't even realize that unconsciously she programmed that. So if you have a loneliness wound, it could be coming from something like that. It could also be coming from a childhood of parents just not being there, workaholics or alcoholics or addicts, or just busy, and maybe lots of other kids, and you were like the youngest kid of many, and you just didn't get love and attention from mom and dad, whether they were a narcissist or not. But you were just, there were all these kids, and then they expected the older kids to raise the younger kids, because by that point they had 8 kids or something. Now, like, they're tired. They don't want to be like investing as much in all the kids. And so you feel lonely, like nobody understands you and nobody gets you and that sort of thing. That imprint could have happened then too. So it doesn't always have to be abuse. It could be neglect. It could just be these, unconscious, almost more like innocent mistakes that people can make, just not knowing the effects that is being transmitted psychically, energetically, to the baby that's being formed, and then all the stresses that the mother goes through. Like, maybe the mother gets pregnant, she's not really with the father. Maybe she doesn't even know who the father is, or maybe she does know and she's like, oh God, like, I don't want to marry this guy. I don't want to father a kid with this guy. It's a bad situation. And so, like, then the mother's stress then gets imprinted into the baby's psychology and spirit, the energy, right? And so all of these things can happen. Some of them are intentional, some are not. But I would go back to those early childhood wounds. Maybe you even get a perception of being in the womb. Maybe because this can happen to people. I've worked with clients that I've taken back, and they've described water or a warm, comfortable, dark environment, and they're perceiving things that are happening outside them. They're in the womb. They're reliving something there. That's where something happened. And what you'll notice is that there are like little frozen parts of you. Like, maybe there's a 5-year-old you, or a 10-year-old you, or a 2-year-old you, or a 2-month-old you, or maybe it's you at 3 months gestation inside your mother's womb, where this pattern got, programmed into you. And so, like, it's like that pattern is frozen inside you, in your body, like your cellular memory remembers that. And so you got to dig into there and find the connection to that feeling. You keep tracing that feeling. They call it tracking in shamanism. You keep tracking that feeling back in time until you find the original point, and then you neutralize that by a new perspective. You look at that in a different way, and you understand something new about that, because that really is the core of all of this. Is like, as much as we want to blame our parents, and like, yeah, they had responsibility, especially, like the narcissistic parents, they definitely had responsibility and fault in what happened. But here's the thing, like, that chain of blame can go on forever, because someone abused them, and someone abused them, and someone abused them, and someone abused them. And like, it's like an endless game of dominoes forever. And there's no one, like, who started it all, who knows, right? At this point. So you can't entirely blame someone else, because they didn't start the game, but they also didn't stop it. Like, if your parent was a narcissist and their parent was a narcissist and the parent before them, okay, your parent didn't start the game, but they also didn't stop it. Like, at no point did the awakening experience that should be parenthood trigger something inside them that says, hey, let's be a better human. Hey, let's love this innocent new life. Hey, let's do something better than what I came from, because I don't want to pass that on to my kid. Sometimes parents just don't get to that level of adult maturity. Sometimes they're adult children raising children, and they're just repeating the same patterns, So when you get to that perspective and you recognize, like, okay, there really is no blame. Like, yeah, my parent carried that on, and yeah, I got that pattern from my parent who passed it on from their parents. And this is like a genetic lineage that has gone on forever. Or maybe it was just some fluke thing that happened. Like your mom just happened to get pregnant young and not be okay with the father and whatever the situation was. And then it was just this innocent thing that sort of happened. And maybe your mother really, truly loves you and really wanted to do the best, but she just tried to make the best of her circumstances. And that's what happened. But the answer to your question, after bringing that all around, is you got to go to those wounds. Like that's the void. That's the emptiness. It's something from your past. It's not about him. And when you recognize it's not about him, that's when you start to release your grip on that and your desire for him to come back, or your desire for his validation. That's one of those things that can keep you stuck, holding on for that hope. And he's probably never going to give it to you. And know that if he does give it to you, it's probably just a manipulation tool to get you back in with him, telling you what you want to hear. But that's not what it is. Why is it so hard for you, honey? It's hard for everybody. This was the hardest part, was that void. It was like leaving that person. Like when I watch a lot of the people talk about these topics in Spanish on YouTube, particularly there's a couple called Stamateas is their last name. And I've only seen them in Spanish, but they use this phrase. And of course, they're coming from this point of view where they think the woman is typically the victim of the psychopath male. And we all know it's 50-50, right? It's probably half and half. Women and men can be abusive. But they say this phrase is, she is bad with him and she is worse without him. And that's what the survivor feels, right? When you leave the psychopath, the narcissist, the borderline, whomever, you get out of this situation, it was bad when you were in it, but you feel like you're so much worse without them, even though you know how bad it was, right? And that's the reality of the trauma bond. That's why it's so hard to let go, because there was a trauma bond, the Stockholm syndrome, like there was neurological wiring that took place. There was a traumatic brain injury that took place. Your amygdala, your hippocampus, like lots of things have changed inside of your brain that need to heal now. And that's why it's so dangerous to keep having exposure to that, because it will keep triggering that trauma bond when you're trying to reset the nervous system. You're trying to reprogram the nervous system. You're trying to get the amygdala to calm down so it's not in a constant state of anxiety and triggering, the norepinephrine and the adrenaline and the cortisol and all of that. You want to calm things down so you can get back to baseline and start to heal. So you really got to get a grip on that as much as you can and redirect yourself and remind yourself, like sometimes it's easier because the thinking conscious brain can't catch up. The subconscious brain works in imagery. So if you place an imagery, I just told this to someone else the other day when I was working with her in a session, she was doing a drive-by situation where she wanted to drive by and see her ex and check out, was the car there and what's going on. And I said, okay, so from now on, start imagining in your mind that place, that house, whatever that place is where you want to go see them or whatever. Imagine it as like a bee's nest, and then they're mad bees and they're going to come and sting. Or imagine it like a viper den and the snake is going to come out of there. Maybe lots of snakes are hidden inside there. Like imagine something very, very dangerous. Put some image, something that you're terrified of. Maybe you're terrified of snakes. This woman told me she was terrified of bees because she's allergic to them. That was just the imagery I happened to have used. But create your imagery and imagine that person's house or that person's whatever, wherever you're feeling drawn to, imagine it looks like that instead. So every time you think about going back there or driving by or seeing what's happening, investigating, you're like, whoa, I don't want to go over there. That's really dangerous. So now your subconscious is on board because it sees the imagery and it's not looking for the old beautiful times back when things were good and all that. Instead, your subconscious is seeing something very, very dangerous. And it's now associating that with danger because there is danger there. The danger is that trauma bond. That's why you want to stay away from that. That's why you don't want to have any contact or leave any openings for that contact to get in, because it can trigger you back to that. You can go back to that and it will get worse. It always gets worse. They get worse. The abuse escalates. It has to. That's the nature of things. And your tolerance to it will increase. And that's another dangerous thing, So What do you need to do is I would put on that imagery of him, that place, something like that. And I would stop that, the opportunity for that to come through. I would completely block all of that. Stop yourself from looking for that validation. Give yourself the closure that you need, that you're never going to need from him. That's the hardest part when you're leaving, is you never get that closure. Everybody wants that closure. Everybody wants that one more conversation. And that's what keeps so many people going back for more. And that's why so many people, they say the average is 7 times people will go back. How many, if you were to interview those people, how many of those people would tell you that really they were just going back for closure and they got hooked in again? Probably the vast majority of them. We get tricked back into things. It's very tricky. That's the nature of con artists. It's a con. They will con you back. So, you don't want to get yourself back in that situation. You don't want to allow those text messages to come through, and you need to really get a reality check and get it in there hard and good that it's not safe. It's not safe at all. It's very dangerous to go back there. You don't want to go back there. So the person from before with the house, my ex-narc wasn't even upset. I went into the house. It's almost like he wanted me to know that he was with someone. Like he thought it would be motivation for me to take him back. What pisses me off is that he's probably using me to triangulate the new girl. It's not just what he's doing to me that's bothering me. It's what he's doing to the new girl that's also just wrong. Right. Yeah. 2 birds, 1 stone, right? Triangulation, with the new one, hurting you for what happened. Sure, he's shameless. He has no problem doing what he does. And just like another woman who called in maybe like a month ago, where her ex set her up, to go into his place and find information that he specifically planted and left for her to find to upset her. And then he already had the immediate comeback when she called him out for it, because he knew she would do it. So similar situation, either he set you up for it or he didn't, but either way, he was very happy that you saw that. Probably he was hoping you'd take him back, or at the very least, he was just hoping that you would desire him, because they need to be desired, and yeah, it is wrong what he's doing to the new girl too, but that's not your problem. That's not your responsibility. You got to take care of you. She has to take care of herself. She's going to figure it out or not on her own when she's ready to. But understand that that's not your responsibility. You can't save her from that. Okay, I have a private message. Ending a relationship with a narcissistic, I think it got double copied there. Ending a relationship with a narcissist that also is in law enforcement, 22 years and 17 of those years married. On May 24th of 2016, found out he was in a relationship with a woman related to his family, found out by accident recording. The confrontation was ugly, and he was about to have me to jail for without his authorization. That is number 1 even. I stay at the house for 1 month more, but seeing that it was getting out of control. I have to run out of my house for emotional safety. When I moved to a safe place at my daughter, a family member sent me a link about how to help a person who was abused by a narcissistic person. Oh my God, all this year I've been sick, physical and emotional. Finally, I am not crazy. I am normal. He's the sick one. Every day I watch or listen on videos. Okay. So I think I've heard from you before, the law enforcement guy, or maybe it was someone else who mentioned the law enforcement guy. This is really tricky when they're in law enforcement and they know that whole system, and they have people in that system who are on their side, and they can do really dirty things. So as soon as possible that you can leave and move out of that area where he has no jurisdiction, because the police, I don't know what country you live in, but in my country, the police only have a certain jurisdiction, a town, a county, a municipality, and that's it. Outside of that, they have no more power. So as soon as possible, if I were you, I would move to an area far, far away outside of that, where he has no power, where he cannot get to you and can't throw you into jail and threaten all of this stuff. As soon as possible, You said you're staying at the house for 1 more month. I don't know if it's possible for you to get a friend or a distant family member or someone you can sleep on their couch or something, or even several people maybe that you can stay with during that time so you can get away from that, because that sounds very, very dangerous. And it's very complicated with him being in law enforcement. And I'm glad you're getting some support from somebody about how to help a person who's been through narcissistic abuse. That's good. And as much support as you can get from your local area. Are there any domestic violence, support for you? Are there, is there anybody that you can work with in that way? Are there support groups of people who have been through abuse that you can talk to? Do you have any family members and friends, hopefully, that you can have as support and you can talk about things? Because you got to talk about it. You got to talk about it. If you were with this guy in law enforcement, probably you were absolutely, utterly terrified to speak about what happened, right? And terrified because he was an authority figure, right? So now when you get out of there, you got to start talking to people. You got to start sharing your truth. You got to get all that out of you, because all of that has been deeply buried inside and it's going to eat at your body. And I'm really glad that you're realizing you're not the crazy one. That kind of abuse is called crazy making, because it will drive you to feel like you're insane. This person continued something about, and give me the drive. I need to keep it going on in the right direction for recuperation. My situation is very unique. A narcissistic police in the same skin left my house with some items, but with all the money under my custody, and the combination of found his infidelity, living the house, taking the money. Okay, yeah, it is a really unique situation in that he is in police, right? And I have also heard from some other people who have been victims of police abuse, maybe not in their relationship, but for some reason the police decided to target this person in the community, and then they all ganged up against this person. That can happen sometimes. Sometimes it can be attorneys, lawyers, who do this, and that's terrifying because they have some kind of authority too. So yeah, these are very, very complicated situations. The farther you move away from that, the better. Like far, 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 far away. I would move as far away as possible so you don't have to be around that, because you'll just feel terror. If you're living in that environment where he has power, you want to move away from his power. What else? Okay, I have another private message. Someone says, I have read somewhere that narcs have issues with food. I mean, they try to use it to control people. My ex once invited me for dinner. He said his mother cooked for us. She is also a narc. The thing is, she cooked so little food that it was embarrassing. Plus, I remember he eats a lot of the time, so he must have been starving even more than me. But for some reason, it wasn't a problem for him. He couldn't say anything negative about his mother, of course. He was always, she's perfect, my family is perfect. But actually, his parents were both narcs, his father the cheating kind, and his mother the guilt-tripping, covert kind. I remember I thought she cooked so little on purpose as a way to tell me you don't matter. But then I also thought I was insane. Do narcs actually have this weird relationship with food? Yeah, they can sometimes. Sometimes like they have a thing about weight. Some women especially will try to force their daughters to be really skinny, and they'll create an eating disorder in the child because they have these weird things about eating and food and their own weight and their daughter's weight or their son's weight. Sometimes, often they'll pass it on so many times. Children of narcissistic parents will end up with an eating disorder because of that. Yeah, that can happen. It could be if you felt that she was trying to send this message, you know her more than I do. And that could have been the particular message she was trying to send. Like, you don't matter. When that happens to a child, that's got to be horrible because they have some kind of like survival programming then around food. So maybe they have something weird where like they can never waste food, even if it was like, a week or more in the refrigerator and it's like rotting, but they're not going to throw it away because in childhood, they didn't have enough food or something, or maybe, as an adult now, they're terrified of leftovers because growing up, the mom wasn't responsible with the food and she left, unsafe food in the refrigerator. It was spoiled or something. And, then the kid ate it and got really sick. And so now the kid is terrified of eating old food. There could be all sorts of things. I mean, food is nourishment, it's love and food, right? Like, you need it for survival. Food is nourishment. It's symbolic in that way. And also people can have a lot of stuff around the body image, and how that connects with food. So yeah, those kinds of things can happen. And, just weird things. Like sometimes some narcs love to cook and they cook really well. And so they like to entertain and have big parties, and they love people to be like, oh my God, the food is so amazing. You're so amazing. They like people just to gush on and on and on. Like, it's nice when someone compliments you and you cook, but that's it. You don't need a lot more than that. But when it's like, they're expecting like the whole table of people just to gush and gush and gush, that could be their form of getting narcissistic supply. A narcissistic parent too could have, an issue if their child decides they want to be like a vegetarian or a vegan or or maybe the parents are vegetarian and the child decides they want to eat meat, and the parent is having issues with that and not allowing the child to make, their dietary choices and responsibilities. Like my mom used the excuse, well, back then we were taught that, you could be malnourished with vegetarianism. And so, she was accusing me of having an eating disorder, which I did not have, when I just wanted to be a vegetarian. And of course I agreed to cook my own food because she wasn't going to cook extra food. That was fine. But then she was trying to convince me that I had anorexia or some eating disorder because I didn't want to eat her food or whatever she was cooking. And that can be really dangerous for a child to start to have these beliefs. A responsible, loving parent will say, okay, well, that's your choice, and I'm not cooking 2 dinners. So you can cook your own dinner. And before we get this started, because we want to make sure that you're a growing child, we want to make sure you're getting all the nutrients you need, you're going to need to do a report. So you're going to need to do some research on the internet, and I'll take you to the library if you want to go, or if you want to just find some stuff online. And, I expect a 3-page report on vegetarian nutrition and how do you plan on getting all your nutrition, and that's the responsible thing to do. Encourage the child to learn things. Take accountability for their own health, take the empowerment of their own health, know why they're making the vegetarian choice, explain why they're making that choice and why that is beneficial for them, and how to do it in a healthy way, how to get their B vitamins and how to get their protein and stuff like that, which are the things that can cause nutrition, right? So yeah, narcissistic parents or narcissists in general could have lots of issues around food. And when they have kids, that can get passed on in very, very toxic ways to the children. Someone says, small kids are like sponges. I actually remember as a young child feeling like I was always annoying or bothersome. I eventually decided to quiet myself because my emotional needs were too much for my parents and some family. My mom and dad had bigger problems than me, so I had to care more about that. That's when I started to put others' needs before mine, right? That is the foundation of codependency right there, where the parents were focused on too many other things. Could have been, or maybe weren't narcissists, right? Depends on the situation. But they were just focused on other things. And so the message that you got was, one, you're not important and you don't matter as much as these other really big important things. And 2, you better not have any feelings or needs or emotions for yourself because those aren't nearly as important as this other thing that we need to focus on. And maybe it was a big deal. Like maybe it was financial stress that they were going through and they didn't handle that well. Like they didn't shelter you from that as a child. And somehow they put that burden onto you as a child should never be burdened with that sort of thing. But because they were so stressed and just didn't know, they hadn't grown up enough to know that you don't pass that on to the kids. You don't instill this fear of financial security in a child, and so that got passed on. And then you realize, oh, well, next to losing the house and, not having a home to live in, my emotional need for love. Okay. And then you start to feel like really guilty for feeling love and a need for love because there's this really big, important thing going on. That can happen. That can be the foundation of codependency right there. So now as an adult, you got to recognize that your thoughts, your feelings, your needs, your perceptions of reality are all very important and valid. And you need to honor those, and you need to take responsibility for them and take care of them, and recognize that it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to have needs, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you don't always have to put those aside for someone else anymore. Now you can take care of those. Okay, the person from the void from before, thank you, you're so helpful. You're exactly right. My wounds are from childhood. My mom told me she didn't want me, and I was an unwanted pregnancy. I'm so sorry, there's a dog barking in the hallway. I hope that's not really distracting. I was an unwanted pregnancy, and I didn't receive love and attention, and the narc zoned in on me like a radar. And it's like he knew me better than I knew myself. He made me feel so important and gave me attention, and I thought he was my soulmate. I'm struggling with letting go of my twin flame soulmate. I really thought he was the one, and I thought I was the one for him. But then when I found out that he was a sex addict and used women, including me, for supply, I was crushed. I'm trying to reprogram my thinking of my childhood and losing my soulmate, but it's so deep-seated, and he played on my wounds. I've never met anyone like him. He was one of a kind and touched my soul. We had great soulful conversations. There's a lot of him I miss, but sex was his major tool in his bag of tricks to lure me in, and I fell hard for him. Right. So many people feel with the narcissist that they found their soulmate, the narcissist, the borderline, the psychopath, whatever, that they found their soulmate. And it's because of that intensity at the beginning, the falsified intensity, the fabricated emotions, the fabricated intensity that you feel like that. And then they start telling you that. And then they start telling you everything that you wanted to hear, you know, and like, you're my soulmate. I waited for you all my life. Like, who doesn't want to hear that? Right. But you don't know that it's a trick. It's a con, that you're being fooled at the time. So, you know, when you recognize that and recognize that that wasn't really like your true soulmate. It could have been a soulmate. If you look at soulmates in the way of past connections, past life connections, you knew each other before, you had unresolved karma, you met again this time, get each other unstuck from that karma and then move on. And it was like a tough experience for both of you. And now you're moving on. You know, it could have been one of those kinds of soulmate connections, but not like he's the person for you forever. You know, because the person that you want for you as a life partner, hopefully, you know, isn't, where was I reading this? You know, a sex addict and using other women, including you, for supply, right? Like, hopefully that's not on your list of what you're looking for in an ideal mate, right? So now you know that's not your soulmate. Like, that's not at least the kind of person you want to define as your life partner, because the person you want to define as your life partner doesn't do those things. Doesn't have those issues, right? Now you see the truth and you realize he wasn't that person for you. It's just that was the initial intensity, and that's why it was so confusing. And someone else asked a couple weeks ago, and I had asked myself when I was leaving the last covert narc, was like, but how do I ever trust my feeling again? Because I really felt like he was my soulmate. And then I listened to Ross Rosenberg's video, and he was talking about, you know, the narcissist codependent relationship. And he goes, and I was literally just asking myself in that moment, like, how did it feel so right? And he goes, the relationship between the narcissist and the codependent is one that like nothing can compare because it just feels so right. And I was like, oh my God. And then he explained it, because it's the perfect hook. It's the perfect yin yang. It's the perfect complement. Opposites attract. Like, you have this void. He has this conning ability to come in and pretend like he's filling that void and giving you everything you ever needed. And he's going to get his supply out of you. And you're going to think he's everything you've ever waited for. And you're going to give everything to him. And then you're going to be in this dysfunctional thing for a period of time until suddenly it all falls apart and you realize the truth, right? Because that's the reality of things. So how do you know that you're not going to get into that same, oh my God, it feels so right with the narc again, is you get healthy. Because, and again, like Ross talks about in his book, when the codependent gets healthy, the whole relationship changes. And usually the relationship ends because that other person doesn't change. They don't change their ways. So the relationship can't go on together anymore. And so that's where you get healthy and you stop those codependency patterns and you heal that wound that you realize was from childhood. right? When that's filled, when that void is filled, then you're not going to get hooked to that anymore. When that wound is being resolved, you're not going to have that attraction to that person, and they're not going to be as attracted to you either, because you're not an easy target. They're looking for the low-hanging fruit, the easy targets. And if you're healing yourself and you're getting rid of those codependency patterns, and they realize it's not going to be easy to con you, they're not going to give it all that energy. They're just going to go find someone else. And so it's not going to happen anymore. There isn't going to be that, oh my God, it feels so right, because it's going to feel so wrong. It's not going to feel right at all, you know? So that's good that you recognize what happened. Your mom flat out told you she didn't want you, and you were an unwanted pregnancy. So pretty sure that your wound is going to be that loneliness. You know, I'm alone in the world. Nobody wants me, sort of thing, right? I'm different. Nobody wants me, all that. And so dig into that. Maybe it's not, maybe you find it has another name. Maybe it is rejection or something like that. But usually the unwanted pregnancy will lead to the loneliness. So I would recommend digging back in there, you know, into those childhood wounds, into the childhood experiences when you felt like that. When you, that void you feel right now, when have you felt like that before? And really feel those situations and really start to understand those situations so you can see that from a higher perspective and resolve those wounds, you know, and then you won't have that hook that attracts these people anymore, and you won't fall for it. And the next time you meet some guy who's like, you know, hey, like you're my soulmate, you're my everything, and you've known him for 12 days or whatever, you're going to go, maybe that's a red flag, you know, and maybe you'll take a step back and you'll really let that person reveal themselves, and you'll really start to notice, you know, what the actual patterns are there and what the actual actions that person are doing or saying about him. And you're not going to get pulled into that anymore. The person with the police officer husband, divorcing him and speaking the truth and recovering myself, he is out of control. I appreciate your advice in the situation, considering it's been almost 2 months, no contact. The divorce is happening and the events was one after one. What should I expect from him? I'm not really sure that I understand the situation. I had thought you were still living with him, but it sounds like you have no contact for the last 2 months and the divorce process is happening now. You know, typically they make the divorce process very difficult. So, you know, hopefully you're letting your lawyer, your divorce attorney know, and hopefully your attorney already knows just from interaction that this is, you know, a controlling, manipulative, abusive person who's wearing the badge of police officer, you know, and pretending to be this exemplary figure in society, but is actually a very manipulative person abusing that position of power. So your attorney knows and expects that, and your attorney can almost be one step ahead of the narcissist and not allow him to manipulate the situation during the divorce, because you want that to go as easy as possible. And I think what I had mentioned to you a couple weeks ago too was find out what he wants. Make sure that he's going to get at least part of what he wants, and then you can get what you want, as long as you're not compromising your boundaries. But he's going to need to get something that he wants for him to sign the paper and let you free. He's not going to do that. He's going to make it really hard if he doesn't get what he wants. So is there any way you can create a situation where you can give him what he wants in some way that's not hurting you, and you can still get what you want, which is this divorce and whatever settlement you need, you know, and make sure that your attorney is really keeping an eye on that. He's going to be one step ahead, or she's going to be one step ahead of your ex, knowing the situation, knowing, you know, how terrified you are that he's going to abuse his position all the more because he's a police officer. Someone writes privately, when I broke no contact, I felt he had someone listening in, or I was recorded. It was strange because he asked me if I wanted him dead. I gave him what he wanted and I said yes, because I felt he was projecting or else set me up again. He had broke me down so much over the years, had hit self-destruct so many times. I finally learned he wanted my life. Yeah, it can get to that point where, like, you realize like this person's going to kill you if you don't leave. Like they literally want to kill you, not just the murder of your soul, but the murder of your physical body. You know, that can happen. It can definitely get to that point. You know, him setting you up like that, yeah, that was probably a setup and a trick, you know, to get you to say that you wanted him dead. And then maybe he could try to use that against you if you tried to go against him. Like, who knows what kind of mind game he was playing with that. You know, it's understandable to have those like, those just like irrational feelings of like, I want this person dead, you know, for what they did. Like when you're in it, it's understandable. You can be driven to that point, you know, and then with space and time, you recognize like, okay, you don't actually wish ill on this person. Hopefully, you know, life will be life and he's sowing his own karma and he will eat the shit that he's creating at someday, but that's not your responsibility to look after or ensure that happens or try to get even. It's really better just to let go of that, to forgive yourself if you're still feeling, you know, any kind of guilt about that or anything. But, you know, to recognize too that if you had stayed there, like he would have driven you to that point. Like if it hadn't just killed and broken your soul, at some point it would kill you, you know, either because like, you know, I know in your situation, he was physically violent. He pinned you down on the floor one time. Maybe he physically killed you, or maybe your body killed itself. Like maybe it would have gotten to the point where you had so much repressed resentment and anger that your body created the cancer that ate you alive. It took over the body and ate it alive, and it destroyed your body. I mean, that could have been the possibility if you continue down that path. So thankfully that's not. Thankfully you got out and you saved your own life, you know, before that happened. Someone says, married to covert narc. Sometimes I feel they use food to attract people since they lack empathy. Also, they love the accolade by providing a basic need. Ah, interesting. Right. Providing the basic need of food. Right. And then what did he say up here? I feel they use food to attract people since they lack empathy. That's so interesting because the covert narc, right? So my mom does this thing with the food thing and she's more covert too. So yeah, it look when a person is like warm and providing all this food, it feels so warming and so loving. And maybe you would think that that person has a lot more empathy than they do. I also know of other narcissists in my family, you know, like mothers of other cousins and whatnot, who like their mothers were narcissists, don't cook at all, ever, nothing, none of that. So it can go either way. Right. But that, I think this case where you're talking about like this covert narc, that's a really interesting point here. They lack empathy. So it's like as if they're putting on this air that they're providing, you know, basic needs and taking care of people, even though that's not what's behind the scene. Excellent observation. Someone says here, I am always really floored by people who say they have deep conversations with their narc. I don't understand how a narc can fake that. My narc could never, ever get deep about anything. One time I was laying at the end of a dock looking at the stars with my narc, and I started talking deeply about life, and he called me a drunk. It made me so sad because although we had been drinking, I was just being real. I am a deep person, but I had to hide that for 6 years with my narc. Right. Usually when people think they're having a deep conversation with the narc is just doing the mirroring thing. Uh-huh. Oh my God, I know. I totally get it. Yeah. Oh my God, you know so much about this. I'm so in awe with you about that. Or they've studied like just enough to know, like, you know, there's some narcs who like to memorize and learn a bunch of facts. Like they don't actually really know anything from experience, but they've read a lot of something and then they regurgitate that back at you. And then they know, okay, so you're into quantum physics. So then they get online and like they learn some things about quantum physics so they can start dropping words, you know, and make you think that they get it or that they're into it or whatever thing you're into. You're into quantum physics or into spirituality or whatever you're into, right? And they pretend like they're into that thing too and they really get it, because then you're deceived. You think that you're having this really deep conversation, but they're not capable of deep levels of intimacy and connection. They're definitely capable about rationalizing and circling topics, and they can be genius level at that. They can have genius level conversations, but the deep emotional intimate connection is not there. anything that is perceived as that is just, it's falsified. It's that, it's the fabrication of the emotions and whatnot, and them making you think, that it's that way. Like you said too about how he called you drunk for saying that stuff. Yeah. I've had those conversations with people and they're like, what are you smoking? You're just high. You're just, you and your crazy talk, and you and you're drunk, or whatever, or that kind of stuff. When you hear those things, those people, they're not even, pretending to like what you like and have a deep connection with you. He just has no time or energy for that. You were probably already well into the devaluation phase when that kind of stuff was going on. Usually at the beginning, they try a little harder to make you think that they're so into what, you're into and all that. So many times I hear from people who say, it's going to be so hard to find another person because I had everything in common with my ex-narc. Like, they liked everything I liked, and I challenged them, and I'm like, did they really? Did they really? Are they still doing those things? Did they do those things before you? Is that really who they are? Or is that just the facade that they put on to get you to have trust? Because remember, when you have commonalities with people, you have instant trust. Instant. They do studies like with that in sociology. And so he was establishing a trust bond. The ones who pretend to like what you like and pretend to be super into what you're into, they're creating a falsified trust bond with you. But you'll notice, like, when you really probe them deeper, like maybe they'll say something superficial about, yeah, and blah, 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 in response to what you say. And then you challenge that and you're like, really, tell me more about that opinion. And they've got nothing. Like, they've got nothing to expand on because they feel nothing deeply about that. They were just on the superficial sort of way trying to get you to think that they were totally into what you're into, and they're into what you're talking about, and they're into you and all that. But that wasn't probably the case. Like I said, the cerebral ones can be confusing because they can really know a lot about topics, really know a lot. But those are the ones that can also drive you into the worst of those circular conversations. Because, man, they will confuse you so deeply, and arguing back and forth, and literally, like, your brain hurts so bad, like your physical brain inside there hurts, like aches after having a conversation like that, because it's just maddening. Someone asked, how can they be good at it? It's like they did nothing but act their whole life. More importantly, considering they are so self-centered, how can they not get bored during the love bombing phase? Okay, hold on. I need to go back and read what was that earlier in response to. It's like they did nothing but act their whole life. Yeah, it is an act. It's a facade. It's the image they want people to think of who they are, and that image is different around different people. Considering they're so self-centered, how can they not get bored during the love bombing phase? I think because they have their mind on the goal, on what they're getting. I think they're so driven after what they want and what they're getting that they have no problem telling you whatever during that phase. Like, they can just put their ego and their pride aside and tell you all this stuff that they actually don't feel or think or believe. And just because they know that they're conning you. It's a con. It's a long-term con, or the long con, as they call it, right? Where they're not just like going to steal your wallet and bump into you and walk off. Like, they're in this. They're investing in you over a period of time to get something out of you over a period of time. They got their mind on that goal, I think. That's what's going on. Person writes here, to the person with the cop narc, have you recorded him? I recorded my narc when things started getting really bad. I did because I really had no idea what he was capable of. That's a good point. Can you do that safely without him realizing? Do you have a cell phone? Someone taught me this recently on an iPhone. There's some kind of app on there. It's just automatically on the phone, and it's called like voice recordings or something. And you can start recording and you can turn the screen off. So it looks like your phone isn't on or working, but it's still recording. And you can put it in a pocket or on a table or somewhere, and the microphone reception is pretty good. So if it's not going to put you in danger, that would be my only thing. You're like, is your life going to be in danger if he figures out that you're doing that? I would be really careful. But if you can do that in a way that you can sneak that and get away with it and record him, you know, then awesome. You'll have more evidence of what he's doing and who he is. Okay. Person from earlier says, yes, I did feel lonely as a child, especially since my mom was a narc and now she's deceased. So I'm having an especially difficult time trying to heal those wounds because I can't have a real discussion with her like I always wanted. Now that I know more about narcs, I realize I would never have had that conversation or closure I needed and wanted, even if she was alive. Exactly. I was just going to say that. How did you heal from your childhood wounds, and what steps can I take to do the same? My wounds are part of my identity, and it's hard to reflect back on reality, to accept that I was unwanted by my mother and the man I thought was my twin flame soulmate. It's so hard to do the work necessary to heal because it's depressing to face the truth, especially when I know my ex-narc is skipping off into the sunset with his new girlfriend. I know life isn't fair, but I've had my fair share of unfairness. Okay, so how to heal from the childhood wounds is just first and foremost starting to be present with the feelings that are coming up. As you dig into that, you know, the feeling that you're most noticing from your recent relationship, when have I felt this before? Go back. When have I felt that way before? And go back and keep tracking that feeling back in time to the earlier memories in childhood and start to resolve those by observing them in new ways. Just like you said here, darn, where was it? My wounds are part of my identity, and it's hard to reflect back on reality and accept that I was unwanted by my mother and this man who I thought was my twin flame. So yes, the wound becomes part of your identity. That's the story that keeps repeating itself over and over and over and over again until we heal those wounds, right? And so like noticing the stories that we're telling ourselves about who we are and where we come from. And one thing is speaking your truth about what happened. And another thing is staying in the blame of it all, right? So when you speak your truth, but you're coming from this place of, there's no one left to blame. The chain of blame goes on forever. Yes, my mother was a narcissist and she did things that weren't right, but no, she didn't start the game, right? Because she just didn't stop it. It's been going on and on and on and on and on for generations and generations and generations. Starting to recognize the higher spiritual perspective of things, seeing the bigger picture, recognizing the deeper lessons in there, recognizing, like for me personally, like I recognize that that was part of my soul contract. Like I had to go through the childhood sexual abuse. I had to go through the childhood emotional abuse because I had to have that path in order for me to do what I do. I'm not saying you have the same path, but what I'm saying is I recognize that that was part of my soul contract that probably, I believe, before I incarnated, I chose that path because I needed to have that experience so I can have the visceral understanding that then I could learn from other people and situations and teachers and research. And I could take that knowledge and then through my own experience, transmute that into wisdom and help people through that experience. And that was just part of my contract. That's the shamanic contract, right? And so maybe for you, there was something in that. Maybe for you, something to do with your purpose and something that you want to do in life. That initial early experience somehow gave you the opening to that path, you know? And there's a lot of people who don't want to look at things that way. Like they just want to look at, no, you know, I'm the victim and that was wrong. And my mother is a horrible person. And, you know, and they just hold on to that and they tell that story all their life. And in one level, that story is true in one level of reality, right? But in the bigger picture sphere of things, and how can we transmute that experience into something positive? At some point, you have to release that story and that identity, right? And shift into a new story and a new sense of empowerment. And that's when you learn and extract the lesson from that, when you see the bigger picture and somehow you create a new sense of passion and purpose moving forward because of that and not in spite of that. When somehow you can use that so it doesn't keep using you. And everyone is unique, and everyone has a unique sense of life purpose, a unique idea of what they want to do and create and what is their mission in life. And everyone had a unique upbringing and childhood. There are archetypes, no? There are similarities and symbolism and whatnot that we can all have in common because we're all sharing the human experience here. So for you, it's about digging into those patterns for yourself and figuring out what those were, what that wound is, and how can you start to reframe your story? How can you start to extract the blessing from the wound so that you can take that forward with you and tell a new story here in the now that then starts to unfold a whole new life path for you based on very, very different patterns, of experience. Because when you are no longer the same person, everything that's happening to you is no longer the same. As you change yourself, life starts to change. As you change yourself, the way you're looking at the past starts to change. As you change the way you look at the past, you start to change in the future and in the present. So it becomes this very positive feedback loop once you can do that. So starting with those childhood wounds, and it's not like it doesn't happen immediately. It doesn't happen like in one session, in one meditation, in one guided visualization, in one, listening to some kind of video or something. Layers and layers and layers of it usually is what's going to happen, especially in situations where there was abuse. We all humans have childhood wounds. Most of those were unintentional. In the case of abuse, it's significantly more severe. There's significantly more layers that we have to work through on that, but it is possible, and so start with the recent taste of this guy and the feelings and the triggers and the things, the wounds that came up, and then dig deeper. And by starting there, you'll be able to dig deeper into that feeling, into childhood. And maybe you'll start to recover some things that maybe you had put out of your life, out of your mind, out of your awareness, or maybe you have like flashbacks and you're like, wow, now I get it. I totally see that. I didn't remember that, or I just didn't get it at the time, and that itself, that revelation becomes healing too. It is a process. I would look up John Bradshaw. He's old school and he has awesome information on healing the inner child. As far as I know, he was a child of an alcoholic. I don't know if his parent was a narcissist. I don't think I've ever heard him explain that, but definitely he talks about the alcoholism and similar situation, what happens with the child, the codependency patterns that develop. So check out his YouTube videos. A lot of them are like recordings from the 80s or something, a long time ago when he was doing seminars and stuff, but you can get a lot of insight from that. You can get some practices from that. Sometimes he even shows videos of group therapy or individual therapy sessions when people are processing their inner child, and it is wild. I've seen people do this with hypnosis too, the age regression, and that's pretty wild too. Not everyone responds well to hypnosis. And even though I studied it, I realized I didn't want to do that with people. I wanted to understand how the mind worked, mostly so I can dehypnotize myself and other people from unhealthy patterns. But if you feel called to that and you find a hypnotherapist that you can trust, you can check that out too. But often, just doing the therapy with yourself, where you're really allowing yourself to going into that inner child and just emoting, expressing all that emotion, getting angry, getting upset, crying, letting that out, all the stuff that was stuffed down that you weren't allowed or you just weren't able to let out back then, and now is the time. And that's when it starts getting better, as that stuff starts coming out, because when that wound isn't there, it's not holding on to that stuff anymore. Someone says, my narc pretended for 3 months. That was it. Every time we broke up and got back together and he was love bombing me, he was just shake his head and be like, yeah, yep, totally. I would probe him deeper and he would segue into something sarcastic. It became more and more apparent over the years he had no depth to his thoughts or his feelings. Yeah. So you figured that out. Okay. So the person from the question before, no, I mean, in general, how can they be that good at pretending they're someone else? How can they be that good? Because that's who they've learned to become. They wear a mask. They don't know who they are. You know, they've like stuffed that down, and all they know is putting on this face to get people to like them, to trust them, to get in so they can get whatever supply they need. They don't really have a solid sense of self. You know, they pretend to like what you like. They pretend to like what the new supply likes. And they do this kind of thing. Or maybe they know they like certain things, but they're just not really confident in who they are. And they have no problem always being someone else. I don't know how they always remember that they're that person with you, and then that person with them, and then that person with them. That must be very hard to compartmentalize and remember. As soon as you see that person, you got to put on this mask and do this, right? I don't know how that all works. I'm not sure, but all I know is they have no problem pretending to be someone that they're not. That is the nature of the con artist. Someone says they are like hoes. They become whoever they need to be. They have no authentic self. They are like a chameleon who changes their opinions or behavior according to the situation. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it is more of an automatic thing. Maybe they don't think about it. Maybe it's like the chameleon. It happens. He's in a different environment and changes, reflecting what's around him. I don't know. I'm not really sure, but they definitely have no problem doing that. What you'll find too, it's funny, if you ever had the opportunity to compare situations with another ex of theirs, is how similar but how different those experiences could have been. And often what'll happen is like the 180, like they were always aggressive with you sexually and they wouldn't let you off, and they pushed and pushed and pushed until you agreed to let them to have sex with you. And with this other person, they were withholding sex. And they were telling them that they weren't attracted to them because they gained weight or they didn't meet whatever, requirements they have now for physical attractiveness. So they're withholding sex. And so it was a very different manifestation of that same thing, sex as control, right? That's the bottom line. But it comes out in a very different way. The sexual aggression and forcing, one person to submit to them, and then refusing to engage at all with this person because they're not attracted to that person. So that kind of thing can happen. That's when you realize, like, one, how messed up that person is. And two, it wasn't you, it's them. It's them. That's who they are. They're putting on these masks and using that form of control in any way that they can with each person, knowing whatever that person's weakness is. So the person that they're sexually aggressive with is the person they know who's been sexually abused, who has a hard time saying no, and dissociates when that happens and allows it to happen. And then with the person that they know is overweight and very sensitive of their body issues, they're going to withhold sex and tell them that they're fat and they're not attracted to them. Like, they know exactly how to play those pieces with each person depending on their vulnerabilities. Someone says in response to the other person, I tried to imagine if my narc was put in a country where he knew nobody, how would he act? Who would he be? He has learned how to mirror everyone around him. I met an old friend today from middle school, haven't seen him in years, and he said, you are still the same bubbly girl I remember. You haven't changed at all. Although, yes, I have changed in a lot of ways. I'm happy he still saw me for who I was years ago. I'm so happy I never lost myself with the narc. I thought I did because I became so dull and monotone. I don't think anyone would know my narc if they ran into him years later, because he's going to be who everyone wants him to be. Right. Probably. And that's awesome that you ran into this old friend who reminded you that you haven't totally lost yourself, that you're coming back to yourself, that inner core essence is still there, right? Just that you went through this horrible experience and, a lot of things happened and, you got really confused and lost, and now you're coming back to yourself. And there's that core part of you that you never lost. So that's awesome. You're welcome to that other person. Someone says, so true to that other person. That was a lovely compliment from that guy. He made your day. The narc grinded me down so bad I was unrecognizable for a while, but I'm doing okay now. I'm me again. Yeah, they will grind you down, but Fortunately, you kept that core part of your soul intact, just like this other person, who mentioned that she ran into her friend from a long time ago who saw that part of her who she always was. So thankfully he didn't break you entirely. Like, he confused you, you got lost, you got uncentered, you got unhealthy and unstable, but you got yourself back. You're coming back to yourself. Someone writes privately, I feel like my narc makes me sick. Finally, I am capable to recognize the horrible feelings she gives me. Unfortunately, I am feeling it with a lot of people, the social anxiety and renewing past relationships. How do I ease the brain? Is it possible to have a lot of narcs in my life, or is it just medication wearing out of my system? Some give me more anxiety than others, and I am terrified of my relationship choices. Okay, I feel like my narc makes me sick. Yes, they do. First they start to make you psychologically sick, and then eventually your body starts to get sick. Eventually your body starts to rebel, and it starts to get, all these different symptoms to try to get your attention, to look at the message and what's really going on. And so when we stuff that down and we, don't pay attention, it gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse. I mean, it could even be as simple as literally you feel sick in the moment, like you just want to throw up in the moment because your body does not want to digest what's coming at you. This person is trying to get you to accept something and you do not want to swallow that. You do not want to digest it. I have had severe food poisoning a few times in my life, and every time I did, was because I was in a really bad situation. And I wasn't able to swallow something. It was coming back up. It was coming out in every way. It was toxic, but I didn't want to see it. The body has an uncanny way of bringing our attention to things. So it's great that you're recognizing the feelings that you're associating with her. When you're around her, when you talk to her on the phone, you have any interaction with her, you feel that way. It's awesome that you're recognizing that now, and that you're recognizing you feel that same way with a lot of other people. So that means those people are toxic. If you're feeling that same way, now you know how your body, that feeling, your intuition, or even your physical body is letting you know, this is unhealthy, this is unsafe, this is toxic, I feel sick. When you feel that way, now you know this is not a good situation. Something here is not good. If you're forced to stay in that situation, then you need to create a new boundary to keep that away. And you'll know when that boundary has been successful, because you won't be feeling sick anymore. That person will be doing whatever they do and you'll be like, okay, but that's all out here and it's not getting past this. There needs to be a better boundary. In some situations where people just don't respect that boundary, or they are just so emotionally intense, it's not a physical proximity boundary or even a verbal argument. It's this emotional pollution intensity. Sometimes it just gets to the point where you got to get away from that person entirely, because you can't be safe, you can't be sane in that kind of ambient abuse. That can happen too. So recognize the clues that your body is sending you and listen to those and your intuition, and honor those and take action and start setting new boundaries with toxic people. And if it's just not working, then the boundary needs to be further. It needs to be no contact, but start at least by setting some new boundaries. How do you ease the brain? Well, the brain has been traumatized. So the less you re-traumatize yourself, the better. The less you put yourself in situations with people who are going to do that time and time again. If you're able to set new boundaries and keep yourself safe from that re-traumatization, then that's okay. But if you're unable to keep that boundary in a way that feels safe because that person is just so abusive that you can't hold that boundary, then you need to take a step back and get out of there, or you're going to end up compromising all of your health, and you're continually re-exposing yourself to the brain trauma, and the brain doesn't heal when you keep re-traumatizing it. So the nervous system just keeps running the same patterns. With time and distance and space and new boundaries, that's when your nervous system can start to be reprogrammed, your brain can be rewired, your amygdala can start to shrink down in neural connections, because right now the amygdala is enlarged, the anxiety switch, it's turned on. So the amygdala is enlarged. So there's all this neural connection happening in this place of anxiety and fear. And it's triggering the primal response to things, the survival response, because you've been in that survival so often. And every time you're in her presence again, or having any kind of conversation, whatever, it's like you're triggered back into that again. So the more that you can start to create distance and boundaries, the better, so that you can allow your brain to start to heal. Those neural connections will start to reform new connections. Then the hippocampus can start to reconnect, because the hippocampus shrinks. All the neural connections start to disappear, which is why the memory starts to go, because the hippocampus transfers the short-term memory to the long-term. After 20 seconds, if the hippocampus doesn't translate that to long-term memory, it's gone. And why is that useful? Well, if you're in a survival situation, it's traumatic, it's survival mode. You can't be paying attention to everything. You can't be learning new things and remembering new things. All that energy, memory, attention needs to be going to survival, not to long-term memory, right? So there's a reason why your brain does that. And it's not forever. Neuroplasticity is the term that they use now. The Harvard 40-year study discovered that people can change their brains through meditation, through other forms too, but especially like the meditation, rewiring your brain from those old patterns into new patterns. But it's impossible to do when you're still in the situation. When you keep going back and the boundaries aren't keeping you safe and it's still getting in, it's impossible to do that healing work because you're still in the trauma. Your brain, your subconscious isn't going to believe you that you're safe. So it's not going to start to heal from that. That's why it's best to get out of that as soon as possible. I know you're working on that, and that's awesome. Because that's when your major healing is really going to take place. In the meanwhile, manage it as best as you can with boundaries. Is it possible to have a lot of narcs in your life? Definitely, especially if you grew up surrounded by that and you're just now realizing it fully, and then you start taking a look around, doing the inventory, and you realize like, oh my God, most of your friends list, was probably somewhere on the cluster B because you were raised by one. It's normal. You were attracted to that. You attracted it because you were the codependency pattern, right? And it's not your fault. It's not your fault at all. But once you start to do that inventory and you realize that a lot of your friends are narcs, it means you need to start removing those people from your life, getting out the toxic people. And it gets really lonely before it gets better because you're going to be alone. Like you're going to have a lot less friends. You might even realize like you don't have friends. Like that happens to a lot of people. Like there's almost nobody in their life and they need to start over because everybody in their life was toxic. It is so much better to have no friends in your life than to have toxic friends. So much better. You said some give me more anxiety than others. The test that I would do, I would put a special ringtone, text tone for each of those people, one for each of them. And you'll start to learn that text and it'll become like Pavlov's dog. You'll hear the text and you'll immediately think of that person. And before you answer that or anything, check in with your body and your feeling and ask yourself, how do I feel right now? And if the moment you get that text and you know who that text is from, and the moment that text comes in, you're in the anxiety panic attack state. And maybe you never even noticed it because before you were just rushing to the phone and rushing to answer. But when you take a step back and the phone is across the room, and normally you wouldn't know who's texting, but now you set up special ringtones and that ringtone goes off and you know exactly who that is. You know exactly that reaction of anxiety is connected to that person and you're afraid of what that person is going to say, or you're afraid of the next interaction, what's going to happen with that person. That's your test. That's when no good. And when you hang out with those people, if you're feeling exhausted, if you're feeling confused, if you're feeling depleted of energy, those are toxic people. Don't spend your time and energy around them. Spend it on yourself, on your recovery process, on getting clear. You won't be as terrified of your relationship choices as you get clear. You're still living in it right now, so it's not clear to you. That's why it's all so terrifying. And you're still surrounded by it. Even the friends that aren't living with you, they're still in your life. So as you take steps to remove those people from your life, to set new boundaries with the person that you're living with, and then to get out of that living situation into a better situation on your own, that's when you'll really notice the major changes that are happening, because you've fully gone no contact with all that. You fully cut all of that off from your life. It's doing whatever it's doing out there, and none of that affects you. When you're living in it, it's so hard to overcome it. You can get to a point where you can manage it and get out safely, and that's very hard, but there's just no way to do it as a long-term strategy. Like, you got to make a plan, and you got to get out as soon as possible, because it's just not going to help you recover staying in it. And, like I said, the more you know yourself, the more you'll know other people. So it'll be a lot easier to recognize people who are coming into your life. You won't be as afraid of the relationship choices. In fact, you're going to feel really confident about them down the road, because you're going to be confident about yourself. You're going to know yourself. You're going to know your patterns. You're going to be healing those codependency patterns. So you're no longer attracting the perfect match for that, which is the narcissistic cluster B patterns. It will make a huge difference in the people that you attract in your life, and the clarity that you have about relationships. Like, it'll just be so clear now that you know too what that trigger is, how your body feels, how your intuition is telling you, I don't feel good around these people. I feel sick. Now that you know what that is, now that's a very, very useful diagnostic tool, and keep working on your plans and keep working on your future. I know you're going to do awesome stuff. Someone says they should all go to Hollywood. I'm sure they would be nominated and win an Oscar. They are actors. Many of them are actors, right? Not all of them, but probably a big pull to that industry is narcissism. I mean, I've met some definitely narcissists. You can watch interviews and see that. And then some of them are the opposite. Some of them are the codependents, desperately seeking approval of other people. And some of them are just in it for the art of it, just because they love that. But I think those are far and fewer between. But yes, narcissists are excellent actors. Someone says, we have hearts, so we can't ignore our deep feelings, even after abuse. It might take a while, but I truly think we know who we are, and that's why we know that we need to get out of the narc's control. We feel so gross and icky with the narc. We know we're burying our best parts of self when we are with them. Amen. At some level, we do know that. Like deep down, even when all we've ever known was that, when we were trained in that abuse, at some level, we know, right, that we're holding ourselves back because we're being with them, and that we need to choose ourselves and get out of that. Someone else said, absolutely, we are the lucky ones that we found out what they are and that we have the support. I'm grateful for this. Yeah, we are lucky that we got out. And we're not lucky that we took the action to get out, right? That wasn't just luck. That was work. So pat yourself on the back when you get out of those situations, because that was not easy. That was the hardest thing in the world to do, was to leave. The hardest part is not all the recovery and everything that happens afterward, which could take years. The hardest part is to get up the gall to leave, like to actually make the plan and follow through and stick with it and not go back. That's the hardest part. And that's not luck. That's your work. So give yourself credit for that. Someone says privately, thank you so much. You're so insightful and helpful. You have definitely found your calling. Thank you. I'm so happy for you that you have turned your past into a path of healing for yourself and others. When I have a weak moment of wanting to connect with my ex-narc, I watch your videos again and remind myself of all the reasons I shouldn't contact him. Good. I hope I can use my experiences too to help others and bring awareness to this epidemic. My well-meaning friends would tell me, if you let someone go and they come back, then they're the one. I had no idea then that boomerang narcs do that exact thing, but for manipulative reasons. I read so many memes that say, if someone touches your soul, don't let them go, never give up on anyone, etc. I'm working on reprogramming all these messages. I've believed that everyone deserves compassion and a second chance, etc. No, not everyone does. I'm learning many life lessons. I just wish I knew sooner. Yeah, you're learning awesome lessons, and that's great. And yeah, we all wish we learned them sooner, right? But better now than never. Better now than never, no matter how old you are. And, it's good that you're going to YouTube, you're listening to my videos, other people's videos. reading, articles, anything to snap you out of that, right? When you feel like you want to go back, when you feel like a weak moment, listen to that stuff. If you've kept, like the separate journal where you've written down all the abusive, manipulative things he did, go back and read that stuff. That'll be a wake-up call too. Excuse me. And that's really awesome that in some way you're going to use your experiences to help other people. However it is that you create that through your unique expression in the world, that is awesome. And yeah, we need to dispel all these cliches. Like, your friends are telling you because they read them on the internet, or someone told them, set someone free, and if they return, they're really meant to be, and all that. And everyone deserves compassion and a second chance. And, that compassion thing, man, that can be so twisted up with like the spiritual abuse, just like my mentor was doing, when he brought that woman in to abuse me, and then he can look good while she abused me. And then he takes me out and tells me, even people like Hitler deserve compassion. Because who has compassion for Hitler? And if you don't have compassion for Hitler, then you're not a compassionate person. That kind of bullshit. That's really brainwashing and confusing. And, compassion has limits. It has to have limits, or you'll lose your compassion. You won't have any more compassion for yourself or anyone else if you've given all your compassion to someone who didn't deserve it and abused it, right? And a second chance is a second chance, but a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, an infinite amount of chances, that's not going to help us, right? No, by the second and third time, it's really clear who that person is. Like I said earlier in the earlier session, I always like to give a person a benefit of the doubt, right? By the second and third time, now you know who they are. They don't need any more chances after that. You don't owe them anything beyond that. You don't. That's who they are. And, those kinds of, naive belief systems that we used to have, and now we have the reality check, the wake-up call. Like, there are people out there. There are con artists who specifically target people who have these qualities, because they know that the person will always be compassionate. The person will always give them the second chance. The person will always second guess themselves. Now we know that we have to manage that more cautiously, that not everyone is deserving of that we need to have boundaries and limits, to our spiritual compassion and whatnot, and be very cautious with that and with the limits and with people and what they're telling us that they deserve. They don't deserve a fifth, a sixth, a seventh chance. No, you already gave them. You don't have to like keep turning your face like over and over again, right? Because you're just going to have your skin's going to be all raw and cut open because everybody just abused you. So that's awesome that you're learning these lessons and that you have this idea that you're going to do something with it. You're going to transmute that into some kind of gift that you can share with others. I mean, that is where, like, that's where you really soar into the thriving stages. Someone says, I lost so much weight while dating my narc. I love food, but when I was around him, especially during discards, I got very sick. I would have to force myself to eat because my body just couldn't. Yeah. So some people have just the opposite thing with food. I had similar thing. When I get stressed, like I can't eat. Like I feel like I want to throw up. I don't have any appetite and I'll end up losing weight. Other people do just the opposite. Stress makes them want to eat and they calm the stress through eating and then they end up gaining weight. Or some people who don't change their food intake at all, but the way that stress impacts their metabolism makes them gain or lose weight, and they didn't change anything with their food, right? But their weight went like this. That can happen. All of that can happen. Yeah. Someone says, I actually have stretch marks from losing weight and gaining weight so fast. During love bombings, I would eat more because I was starving, and then I would slowly eat less and less until the discard would take place. Then I could only get down smoothies. The cycle happened over and over. Yeah. These are the vicious cycles that a lot of us got into, in some way, and it always manifests in a slightly different way, but with the similarity of food issues, weight issues, nourishment, right? That's symbolic of the nourishment. Someone says, I was like that the first time when he broke me down. All the other times my weight was up and down. Yeah, I hear from a lot of people about these issues, and also putting on weight. A lot of people talk about having gained weight. during the end of the relationship or after they finally broke up. And oftentimes that is a protection. This will really often happen after sexual abuse, but it could equally happen, after emotional abuse, where a person will put on extra weight, particularly a woman, especially because of how women are judged by their appearance, and the incredible pressure in society to maintain a certain weight. But women will often put on weight after that experience because it's a way of them subconsciously keeping people away, because they feel safer when they're repelling another potential predator, right? And then when they take care of that, when they take care of why they felt so helpless and powerless, and they start empowering themselves and healing from that relationship, the weight just disappears, because the weight wasn't about the food. The weight wasn't about anything except that this belief that they had that they were unsafe and that they needed the weight to protect themselves so that they wouldn't be a target for someone else. Someone says, I read somewhere that they also changed sexual preference for narc supply, and so self-absorbed match same gender like themselves. That's possible. I haven't heard of that. I haven't seen that in my personal life. I also haven't heard of any situations in particular. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's definitely possible. But that could be, maybe the person is just naturally bisexual. And so they know that they can get supply from men and women. And for whatever reason, they go to men for this particular thing, and they go to women for this particular thing, and they get certain supply from men and women. Could be that they're just bisexual. I'm not really sure. I haven't noticed this trend. It could be one, but I just haven't noticed it. So talking about the weight gain, this person wrote in here, yes, Sam Backman talks about that also to that other person. I think maybe that's in reference to the weight gain. Or the chances, is that what you mean? Sorry. And then she followed up, we gave far too many chances. Yeah, because we were trained to do that, to be a good little girl or a good little boy and forgive people. Yeah, even when people are hurting you and abusing you, no. Hitler does not deserve your compassion. Hitler exterminated a lot of people. So no. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. Maya Angelou, absolutely. In Spanish, they say, la gente misma se pinta. People paint themselves, and they do. Sometimes they will tell you straight up who they are, and sometimes they will just paint themselves through their actions. Eventually, their actions will always reveal them. It usually takes about 2 months to start to see it. Sometimes you can notice it immediately in the first couple of dates, but when you don't know what to look for, and you just don't know. Imagine you didn't know the red flags, right? Usually around the second month is when things start to happen. That's probably around the time you started to get that inkling that something wasn't right and something didn't feel right. Maybe you noticed it from the first couple of weeks, but usually within 2 months, people start to reveal themselves. 2-3 months is usually as long as it can go before that mask starts to slip and you start to see a different person behind that. And yes, believe them, believe their actions. So many times we just want to see what we want to see. We want to superimpose that illusion on top of them. And that's what gets us in trouble. That's what keeps us going back there. We don't want to see what's staring us in the face, and it's so much better to look at the ugly truth than to believe a beautiful illusion. It'll be a lot better in the long term. So, all right, I think I'm caught up, and it is just after 8:00 here in Portland. So I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. Thank you all so much for attending, for bringing your questions and comments. And I'm sending you all a big hug. See you next week. You're welcome.